Black boy takes stray dog home. Gets surprised next day when SUV shows up at his house. Brandon sat at the kitchen table, his pencil scratching against the paper. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. His legs dangled from the chair, not quite reaching the floor. The clock on the wall showed 4:30 p.m. He pressed the pencil harder, trying to get the shading just right on his drawing. It was another house like the ones he always drew, but this one had a family standing outside, all holding hands. The paper was wrinkled where he'd erased too many times. The morning's events played in his mind as he worked. His mother had rushed around the kitchen in her blue nursing scrubs, dark circles under her eyes visible even as she tried to smile. "Brandon, honey, there's bread and peanut butter for your sandwich," she'd said, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Did you remember to pack your homework?" "Yes, Mom." He'd watched her gather her things, moving fast like she always did in the morning. "I'm working the late shift at the second hospital today." She'd paused at the door, keys jingling in her hand. "Don't forget to lock up after school, okay? And no opening the door for anyone." "I know, Mom." The same instructions every day. She'd hurried over to kiss his forehead, the smell of coffee and hospital antiseptic mixing together. "I love you, baby. Be good." Now. Hours later, Brandon's stomach growled. He glanced at his half-finished drawing and then at the kitchen cabinets. The bread bag on the counter had 2 slices left. He knew he should save them for tomorrow's lunch. Getting up from the table, he walked to the window. Outside, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was watching him again, whispering to another neighbor. Brandon could read their lips even through the glass. Always alone. Where's his mother? Poor child. He turned away, his chest tight. The homework in his backpack waited. Math problems he wasn't sure how to solve. His mother usually helped him when she got home from her first shift, but today she wouldn't be back until after he was asleep. Brandon opened the refrigerator, the light inside highlighting how empty it was. Half a gallon of milk, some eggs, ketchup. His stomach growled again. He closed the door and went back to his drawing. The sun moved across the sky, casting longer shadows through the windows. Brandon finished his homework as best he could, guessing at the math answers. When darkness began to fall, he made himself a dinner of 1 slice of bread and a glass of milk, saving the last piece for tomorrow. Through the kitchen window, he could see the Thompson family across the street sitting down to dinner. Their dining room glowed warm and yellow, all of them together around a full table. Brandon watched until Mrs. Thompson pulled the curtains closed. He tried to stay awake, sitting on the couch with the TV volume low, but his eyes grew heavy. The last thing he remembered was the clock showing 9:45 p.m. Hours later, the sound of keys in the door made him stir. His mother's footsteps were heavy, tired. She found him on the couch and sighed. "Oh, baby," she whispered, thinking he was asleep. "I'm sorry." Brandon kept his eyes closed as she draped a blanket over him. He felt her kiss his forehead, her lips trembling slightly. "Just a little longer," she murmured. "Just until I can get that promotion at the hospital. Then things will be better." She stood there for a moment longer, then walked to her room. Brandon opened his eyes, staring at the dark ceiling. The house settled into silence again, broken only by the distant sound of his mother crying, muffled by her pillow. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself, trying to hold onto the warmth of his mother's kiss. Tomorrow would be another day of waiting, watching, being alone. But for now, he let the familiar sounds of the empty house lull him back to sleep, his drawing of the perfect family lying forgotten on the kitchen table. The night passed slowly, marked by the steady tick of the kitchen clock and the occasional whoosh of cars on the street outside. In his dreams, Brandon saw a family sitting around dinner tables, mothers who didn't have to work 2 jobs, and houses full of laughter instead of silence. But even in his dreams, he knew better than to believe in such things. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Brandon was still on the couch, the blanket twisted around him like a shield against the loneliness that filled every corner of the house. Another day was beginning, and with it, the same routine that had become his life, a life of waiting, of empty rooms, and of trying to convince himself that someday things would be different. But for now, the silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of his mother's alarm clock and the beginning stirrings of her morning routine. Brandon lay still, listening to the familiar symphony of another day, starting in the house that felt too big for just two people, especially when one was almost never there. The afternoon sun beat down on Brandon's shoulders as he walked home from school. The Arizona heat made the air shimmer above the cracked sidewalk, and his backpack felt heavier than usual. His worn sneakers scraped against the concrete with each step. "Hey, kid," Mr. Peterson called from his yard. "Tell your mama I said the front steps need fixing. Can't have nobody falling and suing." Brandon nodded without looking up. Their landlord always found something to complain about. The front steps, the peeling paint, the creaky gate. His mother had stopped promising to fix things. They both knew there wasn't money for repairs. The temperature had to be over 100 degrees. Sweat trickled down Brandon's neck, and his shirt stuck to his back. He was thinking about the half slice of bread waiting at home when he heard it, a weak whimper coming from behind Mrs. Garcia's trash cans. He stopped. The sound came again, softer this time. Brandon looked around. The street was empty except for the heat waves dancing off the pavement. He took a few steps toward the trash cans, his heart beating faster. "Hello," he whispered, peering around the metal bins. A small, dirty ball of fur huddled in the shadow of the containers. As Brandon watched, it moved slightly, and two dark eyes looked up at him. "Hey there," Brandon said softly, crouching down. "Are you okay?" The dog, he could see now it was a Yorkshire Terrier, trembled. Its fur was matted with dirt and something darker that looked like dried blood. One of its back legs was held at an awkward angle. "I won't hurt you," Brandon promised, staying very still. He slowly reached for his backpack and pulled out his lunch bag. Inside was the half sandwich he'd saved from his meager lunch, planning to eat it for dinner. His stomach growled as he unwrapped the sandwich. The dog's nose twitched at the smell of peanut butter. "Here," Brandon said, tearing off a small piece. He placed it on the ground between them and waited. The dog watched him, then the food, then him again. After what felt like forever, it inched forward and sniffed the bread. In one quick motion, it snatched the piece and swallowed it. "Good boy," Brandon smiled. "Or girl. I'm not sure what you are." He tore off another piece, this time holding it in his open palm. The dog hesitated less before taking it. As it ate, Brandon noticed something under the dirt and tangles, a collar. "You belong to somebody," he murmured, carefully reaching toward the dog's neck. The Yorkshire didn't pull away this time, focused on licking the last traces of peanut butter from Brandon's palm. The collar was expensive-looking leather, now scratched and dirty. A small metal tag dangled from it, but the text was too crusted with dirt to read. Brandon looked up and down the street again. The houses here were small and worn, nothing like the big homes in the wealthy neighborhoods across town. This dog, with its fancy collar, definitely came from somewhere else. "You're lost," he said. The dog looked at him with those big eyes, and Brandon felt something twist in his chest. He knew what it was like to feel lost and alone. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. In a few hours, it would be dark. The dog was still trembling, its injured leg barely touching the ground. "I can't leave you here," Brandon said, more to himself than the dog. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "No pets, Brandon. We can barely feed ourselves." But as he looked at the frightened animal, he thought about all the nights he'd spent alone in their empty house, wishing for someone, anyone, to keep him company. Brandon took off his light jacket, despite the heat. "Come here," he whispered, moving slowly. The dog watched, but didn't back away as he gently wrapped the jacket around it. When he lifted the small bundle, the dog whimpered but didn't struggle. "Shoo," he soothed. "I've got you. You're safe now." He looked around one last time, making sure no one was watching. Mrs. Rodriguez's curtain twitched. She was always watching, but her house was far enough away that she couldn't see what he was carrying. The walk home seemed longer with his precious cargo. The dog's warmth pressed against his chest, its heart beating fast. Brandon could feel his own shirt getting dirty from the dog's matted fur, but he didn't care. "Almost there," he whispered as they approached his house. The front steps creaked under his feet, the ones Mr. Peterson complained about. Brandon shifted the dog to one arm, fishing his house key from his pocket with the other. Inside, the house was silent and hot. They couldn't afford to run the air conditioning during the day. Brandon kicked off his shoes and carried the dog straight to his room, closing the door behind them. He gently set his bundle down on his bed. The dog stayed wrapped in the jacket, watching him with wary eyes. "This is my room," Brandon told it. "Mom won't be home until really late. We have to get you cleaned up before then." He looked at the dog's matted fur and injured leg. "I don't know much about taking care of dogs," he admitted, "but I promise I'll try my best." The Yorkshire blinked at him, then slowly poked its nose out of the jacket. Its tail gave a tiny wag. Brandon smiled, his first real smile in days. "I'll get some water and paper towels. Don't worry, you're not alone anymore." As he walked to the kitchen, his empty stomach reminded him that he'd given away his dinner. But looking back at the small shape huddled on his bed, Brandon knew he'd make the same choice again. He filled a bowl with water and grabbed the roll of paper towels. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out what to do about the dog's real owners. The collar meant someone was probably looking for it. But for tonight, at least, neither of them would have to be alone. The sun continued its descent outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside Brandon's room, a boy and a lost dog began the careful process of learning to trust each other, both of them understanding something about loneliness, and both of them hoping, in their own ways, that maybe things were about to change. Brandon crept back into his room with the water bowl and paper towels. The Yorkshire hadn't moved from his bed, still wrapped in his jacket. The dog's eyes followed his every movement. "Okay," Brandon whispered, setting the bowl down carefully. "Let's get you cleaned up." He wet a paper towel and approached slowly. The dog tensed, but didn't pull away when he started dabbing at its face. "My name's Brandon," he said softly, trying to keep the dog calm. "I guess I should call you something. How about Lucky? Because I found you." The dog's tail thumped once against the bed. Dark water dripped from the paper towel as Brandon cleaned away layers of dirt, revealing patches of silver and tan fur underneath. "You're actually pretty cute under all this dirt," he said. The dog started to relax, leaning into his touch. "I bet your owners miss you a lot." As he worked, Brandon's stomach growled loudly. The dog's ears perked up at the sound. "Yeah, I'm hungry too, but we have to get you cleaned first." He used almost half the roll of paper towels before the dog started looking more like a Yorkshire and less like a mud ball. The injury on its leg was visible now, a nasty scrape that made Brandon wince. "That looks like it hurts," he said. "I wish we had some medicine or something." The sound of a car door slamming made them both jump. Brandon ran to his window. His mother's tired figure was walking up the front path, home early from her first shift. "Oh no," Brandon whispered. He looked at the dirty paper towels scattered across his floor. "Quick, under the bed!" He scooped up the dog, wincing at its small yelp of pain, and placed it gently under his bed. "Please be quiet," he begged, shoving the dirty paper towels under there too. The front door opened. "Brandon?" "I'm home." "Coming, Mom." He gave the dog one last pleading look before rushing out, closing his bedroom door behind him. His mother stood in the kitchen, looking more exhausted than usual. "How was school today?" "Fine," Brandon said quickly, try to act normal. "Did you eat yet?" She shook her head, setting down her purse. "No time. I've got 2 hours before my next shift starts." She looked at him more closely. "Why are you all wet?" Brandon glanced down at his shirt, spotted with water from cleaning the dog. I was washing my hands. A lot. They taught us about germs and science today." "That's good, honey." She opened the refrigerator, then closed it with a sigh. "We need groceries. I'll try to go shopping tomorrow after my morning shift." A scratching sound came from Brandon's room. His heart stopped. "What was that?" his mother asked. "My pencil probably fell off the desk," Brandon said too quickly. "I'll get it." He hurried to his room, slipping inside and closing the door. The dog had crawled out from under the bed and was scratching at his closet door. "No, no, no," Brandon whispered, picking it up. "You have to be quiet." The dog whined softly. Squirming in his arms, Brandon realized what was wrong. It needed to go outside. "Brandon?" His mother called. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom. Just organizing my homework." He looked frantically around his room. The window? No, it was too high, and the dog was hurt. The bathroom? His mom would hear. The dog whined again, more urgently. Please, Brandon whispered. Just hold it a little longer. Please. A knock on his door made him jump. Brandon, can I come in? 1 second. He placed the dog back under the bed, kicking the dirty paper towels further back. Okay. His mother opened the door, peering in. Are you sure you're all right? You're acting strange. I'm fine, Brandon said, sitting on his bed to block her view underneath. Just tired. She frowned, looking around the room. What's that smell? Brandon's heart pounded. What smell? It's like... She sniffed. Did you bring food in here? No. I spilled some water. That's all. His mother looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but her watch beeped. I need to shower and change for my next shift. She walked over and kissed his forehead. There's some bread left for dinner. I'll bring home groceries tomorrow, I promise. Okay, Mom? She paused at the door. I love you, baby. I'm sorry I'm not here more. I love you too, Brandon said, guilt twisting in his stomach. After she left, Brandon slumped back on his bed. The dog crawled out, looking at him with urgent eyes. Okay, he whispered. Let me think. He could hear the shower running in the bathroom. Moving quickly, Brandon gathered the dog in his arms and crept to the back door. The yard was small and fenced, currently dark in the evening shadows. He set the dog down gently on the grass. Quick, before she finishes her shower. The Yorkshire limped a few steps away to do its business while Brandon kept watch at the door, heart pounding with every sound from inside the house. Come on, he whispered. Finally, the dog limped back to him. Brandon scooped it up and hurried back inside, just as the shower turned off. Back in his room, Brandon collapsed on his bed, the dog curled against his side. His mother's footsteps moved from bathroom to bedroom. A few minutes later, he heard her calling goodbye. I'll be back late, she said through his door. Don't wait up. Bye, Mom. The front door closed. A car started, then silence. Brandon let out a long breath. The dog looked up at him, tail wagging slightly. That was close, he told it. His stomach growled again, reminding him he hadn't eaten since lunch. Stay here. I'll get us some food. In the kitchen, he found the last slice of bread. He split it in half, giving the larger portion to the dog. Tomorrow we'll figure out where you belong, he said, watching the Yorkshire eat. But tonight, you can stay with me. As night fell outside, Brandon lay on his bed with his new friend curled up beside him. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. He knew he should feel guilty about hiding things from his mother, about giving away their food. But as the dog's warm weight pressed against his side, all he felt was less alone. The Yorkshire's breathing eventually steadied into sleep. Brandon stroked its now cleaner fur, thinking about tomorrow. Someone was probably looking for this dog. Someone with a nice house and plenty of food who could take proper care of it. The thought made his chest hurt. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, in the quiet darkness of his room, Brandon let himself enjoy having a friend, even if it was just for one night. His own eyes grew heavy as the day's events caught up with him. Outside, cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the ceiling. The dog twitched in its sleep, chasing dream rabbits perhaps. Brandon smiled, drifting off to sleep himself. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the big, empty house. And that, he decided as sleep took him, was worth any trouble he might be in tomorrow. Morning light filtered through Brandon's window, waking him earlier than usual. For a moment, he couldn't remember why his bed felt warm or why his jacket was missing. Then he felt movement beside him, and everything came rushing back. The Yorkshire was still there, looking better after yesterday's cleaning, but still dirty. Its eyes opened as Brandon sat up, tail wagging slowly against the bed. We made it through the night, Brandon whispered, patting the dog's head. Then he heard what had woken him, his mother's key in the front door. His eyes widened. Oh no, she wasn't supposed to be home this early. Brandon jumped up, looking around frantically at the evidence scattered across his room. Dirty paper towels, water bowl, dog hair everywhere. Brandon, his mother called. You up? Just a minute. He grabbed the paper towels, shoving them deep into his trash can. Under the bed, he told the dog, which obediently limped to its hiding spot. I brought groceries. His mother's voice was closer now. Brandon kicked the water bowl under his desk and grabbed a shirt to wipe up the water spots on his floor. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. The doorknob turned. Brandon dove onto his bed, trying to look casual. His mother's tired face appeared. "Hey, baby, why aren't you dressed for school?" I just woke up," Brandon said, pulling his blanket up to hide the dog hair on his clothes. She frowned, sniffing the air. "What's that smell?" "What smell?" She stepped into the room, looking around. "It smells like—" Her eyes landed on something near his desk. Brandon followed her gaze, and his heart sank. The dog's paw prints, still muddy from yesterday, led right to his bed. His mother walked over, bending to examine them. "Brandon," she said slowly, "what are these?" "They're a small whimper came from under the bed. His mother froze. "Brandon Michael Carter." Her voice was deadly quiet. "What is under that bed?" He swallowed hard. "Mom, I can explain." She got down on her knees, peering under the bed. The Yorkshire chose that moment to crawl out, pressing itself against Brandon's legs. "A dog?" His mother stood up slowly. "You brought a dog into our house." "He was hurt," Brandon said quickly. "I found him yesterday. He was all alone and scared and Dash. Do you have any idea how irresponsible this is?" She ran a hand through her hair. "We can't afford a dog, Brandon. We can barely afford to feed ourselves." "I gave him my bread," Brandon said in a small voice. His mother's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "That's even worse. You need to eat." The dog pressed closer to Brandon, trembling. He put a protective hand on its head. "Look at his leg," Brandon pleaded. "He's hurt. I couldn't leave him out there." His mother looked at the Yorkshire's injured leg, then at the expensive collar around its neck. "This isn't just some stray, Brandon. This dog belongs to someone." "I know, but Dash, do you understand what this looks like?" She began pacing. "Us taking someone's expensive dog? People will think we stole it." "No." Brandon's eyes filled with tears. "I was going to find the owners. I just wanted to help him first." His mother sat heavily on his bed. "Baby, I know you meant well, but we can't keep taking care of this dog. We don't have the money for food, let alone vet bills." "But Mom, Dash, and what if the owners report it stolen? What if they call the police?" She looked at him, her own eyes wet. "I could lose my jobs. We could lose the house." Brandon hadn't thought of that. His stomach churned with guilt. The dog limped over to his mother, putting its head on her knee. She looked down at it, sighing. "It is kind of cute," she admitted. "Under all that dirt." "His leg is hurt," Brandon said quietly. "I tried to clean it, but I didn't know what else to do." His mother gently examined the injury. "It's not too deep, but it needs proper cleaning." She looked at the dog's matted fur. "And a real bath." Hope flickered in Brandon's chest. "Does that mean?" "It means we're going to clean it up and then find its owners." She fixed him with a stern look. "Today?" Brandon's shoulders slumped. "Yes, Mom." She stood up, heading for the bathroom. "Bring the dog. Let's at least do this properly." Brandon carefully picked up the Yorkshire, following his mother. She was running warm water in the tub, pulling out the first aid kit they rarely used. "The collar's too dirty to read," she muttered, gently lifting the dog into the water. "But it looks expensive. This dog probably comes from the nice part of town." Brandon watched as she carefully washed the Yorkshire, revealing more of its silver and tan coat. The dog stayed surprisingly still, only whimpering when she cleaned its injured leg. "There," she said finally, wrapping the leg with gauze from the first aid kit. "That's the best I can do." The dog looked completely different now, small and elegant. Nothing like the dirty creature Brandon had found. Its collar shone in the bathroom light, and now he could read the tag. "Thompson," he read aloud. 1242, Oak Grove Drive. His mother's face paled. "Thompson? As in Richard Thompson, the real estate developer?" Brandon shrugged, but his mother was already grabbing her phone, typing frantically. "Oh, God," she muttered. "Look." She showed him a news article. "Reward offered. Beloved family pet missing in Phoenix area." Below was a picture of the very same Yorkshire, pristine and groomed, sitting in what looked like a mansion. "They're offering $5,000 for information," his mother read. "Their security cameras caught someone taking the dog yesterday afternoon." Brandon's heart stopped. "But I didn't take him. He was hurt. I was trying to help." "I know, baby." She pulled him close. "But how's it going to look?" "Us. with their expensive dog, when they're offering all that money? The Yorkshire, now clean and bandaged, sat between them on the bathroom floor, looking from one to the other with big eyes. "What do we do?" Brandon whispered. His mother looked at her watch. "I have to be at work in an hour." She stood up, decision made. "Get dressed. We're taking the dog back now before this gets any worse." "But Mom Dash, no buts. This dog belongs to someone else, someone who's probably worried sick." She softened her voice. "You did a good thing helping it, Brandon. But now we have to do the right thing and take it home." Brandon looked at the Yorkshire, remembering how nice it had been to not feel alone last night. But his mother was right. The dog wasn't his to keep. "Okay," he said quietly. "Good boy." She kissed his forehead. "Get ready quickly. Oak Grove Drive is on the other side of town." As Brandon got dressed, he could hear his mother in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out how to explain everything to the Thompsons. The Yorkshire followed him around his room, its bandaged leg already looking better. "You'll be home soon," Brandon told it, trying to sound happy about that. But as he got ready to say goodbye to his only friend, he couldn't help wondering if doing the right thing always had to hurt this much. Brandon sat in the passenger seat of their old Honda, the Yorkshire cradled in his lap. His mother kept glancing at her phone's GPS, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Maybe we should wait," she said for the third time. "Think this through?" A car honked behind them as she hesitated at a green light. The Yorkshire's ears perked up at the sound. "The security cameras," Brandon said quietly. "You said they saw someone take him?" "Yes." His mother accelerated slowly. "Mrs. Rodriguez called this morning. Said she saw you carrying something yesterday. She must have told others." Brandon's stomach twisted. "But I was helping him. He was hurt." "I know, baby," she sighed, turning onto a wider street. "But it doesn't always look that way to other people." They passed from their neighborhood into nicer areas. The houses grew bigger, the lawns greener. Brandon watched a sprinkler system watering perfectly manicured grass, thinking about their own dead lawn back home. "Look," his mother said suddenly, pulling over. "We need to talk about what we're going to say." She parked under a tree, turning to face him. The Yorkshire shifted in Brandon's lap, its tail wagging slowly. "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday." Brandon stroked the dog's clean fur, now soft under his fingers. "I was walking home from school. It was really hot. I heard crying behind Mrs. Garcia's trash cans." "And you just took the dog?" "No. I gave him some of my sandwich first. He was really scared and dirty. His leg was hurt." Brandon's voice got smaller. He looked lonely. "Like me?" His mother's face crumpled for a moment before she caught herself. "Okay, then what?" "I used my jacket to carry him home. I tried to clean him up with paper towels." He looked down. "I'm sorry I lied to you." She reached over to squeeze his hand. "You were trying to help." But Brandon, people might not see it that way, especially rich people like the Thompsons. A police car cruised past them, and his mother tensed until it disappeared around a corner. "Are they going to arrest me?" Brandon whispered. "No, baby. No one's getting arrested." But she didn't sound completely sure. "We just need to explain everything clearly. Show them his leg. Tell them how you found him." Brandon nodded, but his throat felt tight. The Yorkshire licked his hand as if sensing his distress. His mother's phone buzzed. She looked at it and went pale. "What?" Brandon asked. She turned the phone to show him. It was a neighborhood watch message. "Alert. Missing dog update. Security footage shows young boy taking Yorkshire Terrier near Garcia residence. Contact authorities with information." "But that's not what happened." Brandon's voice cracked. "Sure, it's okay." His mother put the phone away. "This is why we're going now, to explain everything before it gets worse." She started the car again, but Brandon saw her hands shaking slightly. They turned onto Oak Grove Drive, and Brandon's eyes widened. Every house looked like a mansion, with circular driveways and fancy cars parked out front. "Which number was it?" his mother asked. 1242, Brandon read from the collar tag again. They found it near the end of the street, a huge white house with pillars in front. A black SUV and a red sports car sat in the driveway. His mother parked on the street, staring at the house. "Remember," she said, "tell the truth. Every detail." "Okay." Brandon nodded, his heart pounding. The Yorkshire's tail started wagging faster as it recognized its home. They walked up the long driveway, Brandon carrying the dog. Each step felt heavier than the last. Security cameras watched from every corner of the house. At the front door, his mother took a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. Chimes echoed inside. "What if they're not home?" Brandon whispered. The door opened. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, phone to his ear. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw them. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then looked at the Yorkshire in Brandon's arms. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Thompson?" Brandon's mother said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We found your dog." The man's eyes narrowed, moving from the dog to Brandon to the security cameras above them. "Found," he repeated, his voice cold. "Is that what you're calling it?" Brandon felt tears threatening. "He was hurt," he said quickly. "I was trying to help Dash save it." Mr. Thompson cut him off. "I've seen the security footage. Taking someone's pet is a serious offense." "Sir, please." Brandon's mother stepped forward. "Look at his leg. My son found him injured, scared Dash. And instead of calling the number on his tag, you took him home." Mr. Thompson's voice rose. "Do you know how worried my family has been? How much money we've spent on search parties?" The Yorkshire squirmed in Brandon's arms, whining to get to its owner. But Mr. Thompson made no move to take it. "I'm calling the police," he said, pulling out his phone. "No." Brandon's mother's voice cracked. "Please, just let us explain. Look at the bandage on his leg. We cleaned his wounds. We took care of him, Dash. With what money?" Mr. Thompson looked at their worn clothes, their old car in the street. "Were you hoping for the reward?" Brandon couldn't hold back his tears anymore. "I just wanted to help him. He was all alone and scared and hurt, and Dash, Brandon." His mother's hand on his shoulder stopped him. She turned to Mr. Thompson, her voice tight. "Sir, my son made a mistake in not calling right away. But he's 10 years old, and he did what he thought was right. The dog was injured. We have proof." Mr. Thompson looked at the Yorkshire again, finally seeming to notice the bandaged leg. His expression flickered. "Please," Brandon's mother continued. "We came here voluntarily to return him. We didn't ask for any reward. We just wanted to make sure he was safe." The Yorkshire whined again, louder this time. Mr. Thompson stared at them for a long moment, his phone still in his hand. Finally, he lowered it. "Come inside," he said, his voice slightly less cold. "I want to hear exactly what happened. Every detail." Brandon looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. They stepped into the massive house, the Yorkshire still cradled in Brandon's arms, their future hanging on whether they could make this man understand the truth about what had really happened yesterday afternoon behind those trash cans. The Thompsons' foyer was bigger than Brandon's entire living room. His worn sneakers squeaked against the marble floor as Mr. Thompson led them through the house. "Wait here," he said, gesturing to a formal sitting room. "And don't touch anything." Brandon stood awkwardly, still holding the Yorkshire. His mother perched on the edge of an expensive-looking chair, her nurse's scrubs out of place among the fancy furniture. "Honey," a woman's voice called from upstairs. "Who was at the door?" "Come down here," Mr. Thompson called back. "And bring Emma." Footsteps echoed above them. The Yorkshire's tail began wagging frantically. A moment later, a well-dressed woman appeared with a young girl about Brandon's age. "Charlie!" The girl screamed, running forward. The Yorkshire, Charlie, leaped from Brandon's arms, limping quickly to meet her. "Oh my God," Mrs. Thompson gasped, seeing the bandage. "What happened to him?" "That's what we're about to find out." Mr. Thompson's voice was stern. "These people claim they found him yesterday." Brandon's mother stood up. "My name is Sarah Carter. This is my son, Brandon. He found your dog injured behind some trash cans in our neighborhood, and you didn't think to call the number on his tag?" Mrs. Thompson asked, picking Charlie up protectively. "The tag was too dirty to read," Brandon said quietly. "I cleaned it this morning, after keeping our dog overnight," Mr. Thompson added. "Richard," Mrs. Thompson touched his arm. "Look at his leg. Someone bandaged it properly." "I'm a nurse," Brandon's mother explained. "We cleaned the wound and bandaged it this morning." Emma was hugging Charlie close, but she looked at Brandon curiously. "You helped him?" Brandon nodded. He was really scared and hurt. I couldn't leave him there." "Perhaps we should all sit down," Mrs. Thompson suggested, giving her husband a meaningful look. They arranged themselves on the expensive furniture, the Thompsons on one couch, Brandon and his mother on another. Charlie stayed in Emma's lap, but kept looking at Brandon. "Start from the beginning," Mr. Thompson said, "and don't leave anything out." Brandon took a deep breath. "I was walking home from school. It was really hot yesterday. I heard crying behind Mrs. Garcia's trash cans." He told them everything, finding Charlie, sharing his sandwich, carrying him home in his jacket. His mother added details about cleaning the wound and giving the dog a proper bath that morning. "I was going to look for his owners today," Brandon finished. "But Mom saw the news about the reward and the cameras." "So you did know about the reward," Mr. Thompson interrupted. "That's not why we came," Brandon's mother said firmly. "We came because it was the right thing to do." Mrs. Thompson was looking at Charlie's bandaged leg. "Richard, look how well they cleaned him up. That's not something someone would do if they were planning to keep him." "The security cameras dash," Mr. Thompson began, "show a boy carrying an injured dog." His wife cut in. "Not stealing it." Emma spoke up suddenly. "Charlie likes him, Daddy. Look." The Yorkshire had jumped down from her lap and limped over to Brandon, putting his head on Brandon's knee. Brandon's hand automatically went to scratch behind Charlie's ears. Mr. Thompson watched this, his expression softening slightly. "You said you found him behind trash cans?" "Yes, sir. Near Mrs. Garcia's house on Pine Street." "That's almost 2 miles from here," Mrs. Thompson said. "Charlie must have gotten out through the garden gate when the landscapers were here." "The same gate I told them 3 times to fix," Mr. Thompson muttered. Brandon's mother checked her watch and paled. "I'm going to be late for my shift." "You work today?" Mr. Thompson asked. "I work every day, sir. 2 jobs." She straightened her scrubs. "I'm sorry we can't stay longer, but I need to get to the hospital." "2 jobs?" Mrs. Thompson asked softly. "Yes, ma'am. Morning shifts at Phoenix General, evening shifts at St. Luke's." The Thompsons exchanged a look. "Which unit?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "Emergency at Phoenix, geriatric at St. Luke's." Mr. Thompson's eyebrows rose. 16-hour days? "Sometimes more." She stood up. "Brandon, say goodbye to Charlie." Brandon hugged the Yorkshire one last time. "Be good," he whispered. "No more running away." Charlie licked his face, making him smile despite his tears. "Wait," Mr. Thompson said as they turned to leave. He looked uncomfortable. "About the reward?" "We don't want it," Brandon's mother said firmly. "We just wanted to make sure Charlie got home safely." "But Mom," Brandon said suddenly, "maybe we could use it to fix the front steps? So Mr. Peterson stops complaining?" His mother's face flushed. "Brandon, we're not taking their money." "Front steps?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "Our landlord," Brandon explained before his mother could stop him. "He says they're dangerous, but we can't afford to fix them yet." Another look passed between the Thompsons. "Sarah," Mrs. Thompson said, "could you stay for a moment?" "Richard, why don't you take the children to see Charlie's favorite spots in the garden? I'm sure Brandon would like to know where Charlie spends his time." Brandon looked at his mother, who nodded reluctantly. "Go ahead, baby. Just for a minute." Mr. Thompson led Brandon and Emma outside, Charlie limping along beside them. The garden was huge, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a fountain. "Charlie likes to chase butterflies over there," Emma pointed. "That's probably how he got out." The gate was broken. Brandon watched Charlie sniffing around his favorite bush. "He's really happy here." "Thanks to you," Emma said. "Daddy was really mad yesterday, but I knew someone kind must have found Charlie." "Emma," Mr. Thompson said quietly, "why don't you take Charlie to his water bowl? I'd like to talk to Brandon for a minute." After Emma left, Mr. Thompson knelt down to Brandon's level. His face was serious but not angry anymore. "You did a brave thing," he said, "helping Charlie when you didn't know if you'd get in trouble." Brandon looked at his feet. "I just didn't want him to be alone and scared. Like you are? When your mother's working?" Brandon's head snapped up. Mr. Thompson's eyes were kind now. "Your mother works very hard," he continued. "But it must be difficult, being alone so much." Brandon nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Well," Mr. Thompson stood up, brushing off his expensive pants. "Perhaps we can do something about that." Inside, they found Mrs. Thompson hugging Brandon's mother, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "Is everything okay?" Brandon asked, running to her. "Everything's perfect, baby." She smiled, a real, bright smile he hadn't seen in ages. Mrs. Thompson just offered me a job. A head nurse position, Mrs. Thompson added. At my father's private hospital. One shift, better pay, and weekends off. Brandon's mouth fell open. Mr. Thompson put a hand on his shoulder. And he said, I happen to know a very good contractor who can fix those front steps. Free of charge. We can't accept Dash, Brandon's mother began. Consider it Charlie's reward for making a new friend, Mrs. Thompson interrupted. Speaking of which, Emma has dance classes on Saturdays. Charlie gets quite lonely then. Perhaps Brandon could come visit? Brandon looked at his mother hopefully. She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in too long. I suppose we could arrange that, she said. After the front steps are fixed. Charlie barked once, as if agreeing. Everyone laughed, the tension of the morning finally broken. As they prepared to leave, properly this time, Brandon took one last look at Charlie, safe in his fancy house with his loving family. The Yorkshire wagged his tail, and Brandon realized something. Sometimes helping others means helping yourself too. His mother's hand found his as they walked to their car. For the first time in years, her grip wasn't tired or stressed. It was hopeful. Ready to go home? She asked. Brandon nodded, thinking about Charlie's bandaged leg, Emma's friendly smile, and the promise of better days ahead. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Would you like to see where I kept him? Brandon asked suddenly, his voice small in the Grand Thompson living room. Everyone turned to look at him. Charlie, still favoring his bandaged leg, perked up at Brandon's voice. The Yorkshire had been sticking close to him despite being home. Mrs. Thompson smiled gently. I think that's a wonderful idea. Richard, Mr. Thompson checked his Rolex. I suppose we have time. Sarah? Brandon's mother smoothed her wrinkled scrubs. If you're sure it's not an imposition. Not at all, Mrs. Thompson said. Emma, would you like to go too? Emma nodded eagerly, already picking up Charlie. Can we take both cars? So Charlie doesn't have to leave Brandon yet. The adults exchanged looks. Finally, Mr. Thompson nodded. I'll follow in our car. Emma can ride with Brandon and his mother, if that's all right. Brandon's face lit up. His mother smiled. Of course. The drive back felt different with Emma in the back seat, Charlie in her lap. She chattered about her dance classes, her school, and mostly about Charlie. He's never gotten out before, she said. Daddy was so angry at the landscapers. He fired them this morning. Brandon watched houses get smaller through the window as they drove back to his neighborhood. Emma fell silent too, looking at the change in scenery. Their old Honda pulled up to the small house with its crooked steps. Mr. Thompson's black SUV parked behind them. This is where you live? Emma asked, no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. Yeah, Brandon said, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint and dead grass. They all got out, Charlie wiggling to be put down. The Yorkshire immediately limped to Brandon's side. The steps are here, Brandon's mother explained to Mr. Thompson, pointing at the worn wooden stairs. Our landlord says they're a liability. Mr. Thompson examined them, frowning. They're more than a liability. They're dangerous. I'll have someone out here tomorrow. Inside, Brandon led them to his room. It felt strange, having these wealthy people in his small space with its second-hand furniture and bare walls. This is where you kept Charlie? Emma asked, looking around. Brandon nodded, getting down on his knees to pull out his jacket from under the bed. This was his bed. I didn't have anything else soft enough. Mrs. Thompson touched the worn jacket. You gave him your only jacket? It's Arizona, Brandon shrugged. I don't need it much. Charlie sniffed around the room, tail wagging as he recognized the space. He went straight to the spot where the water bowl had been. I used paper towels to clean him, Brandon continued, showing them the trash can still full of dirty towels. I couldn't read the tag because it was too dirty, but I was going to try washing it today. Mr. Thompson picked up one of the paper towels, looking at the dried blood. His leg was bleeding this badly? Yes, sir. That's why I couldn't leave him. Brandon's voice got stronger. He was crying and scared and hurt. I know I should have tried harder to find you, but he needed help right then, Mrs. Thompson finished softly. Emma was looking at Brandon's drawings on the desk. Did you draw these? Brandon nodded. I draw a lot when I'm here alone. Alone? Mrs. Thompson asked. Mom has to work, Brandon explained. It's okay. I'm used to it. The adults exchanged another look. Charlie limped over to Brandon's bed and jumped up, turning in circles before lying down. He likes it here, Emma said, surprised. He was good company, Brandon admitted. It was nice, not being alone for one night. His mother made a small sound, like she was holding back tears. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Brandon, he said, would you show me where exactly you found Charlie's? Behind Mrs. Garcia's trash cans, Brandon said. It's just a few blocks away. They all walked together, Charlie insisting on walking beside Brandon despite his injury. The neighborhood looked different in the morning light, less threatening. Mrs. Garcia was in her yard when they arrived. Her eyes widened at the sight of their group. Brandon, she called, is everything okay? Yes, ma'am, he said. I'm just showing them where I found their dog. She came closer, looking at Charlie. Oh, the poor thing from yesterday? I heard it crying, but I couldn't find where it was coming from. Right here, Brandon said, leading them behind the trash cans. Dark spots still stained the concrete, dried blood from Charlie's leg. Mr. Thompson examined the area. He must have gotten caught on something while running. These metal bins are sharp. There was a lot of blood, Brandon said quietly. I was scared he wouldn't make it if I left him. Emma hugged Charlie closer. Mrs. Thompson put a hand on Brandon's shoulder. You saved him, she said. You did exactly the right thing. Mr. Thompson was looking at something on his phone. The security camera footage, he said suddenly. Look, he showed them the screen. The grainy video showed Brandon finding Charlie, offering his sandwich, gently wrapping him in the jacket. Oh, Mrs. Thompson breathed. Look how careful he is. Brandon watched himself on the screen, remembering how scared he'd been. Not of getting in trouble, but of the dog being hurt worse. I had to help, he said simply. Charlie barked, as if agreeing. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. Well, Mr. Thompson said, putting his phone away, I think we've seen everything we need to see. They walked back to Brandon's house slowly, Charlie still limping but wagging his tail. The morning sun was getting higher, making the peeling paint look even worse. Sarah, Mrs. Thompson said as they reached the cars, why don't you come by the hospital this afternoon? We can sort out the paperwork for your new position. Brandon's mother nodded, tears in her eyes again. Thank you. I can't tell you what this means. Thank your son, Mr. Thompson said. His compassion made all this possible. Emma was saying goodbye to Brandon, promising to see him Saturday when he visited Charlie. The Yorkshire looked between them, tail wagging. You'll take good care of him? Brandon asked her. Promise, she said. And you'll come play with him lots? Every chance I get. As the Thompsons prepared to leave, Charlie broke away from Emma and limped back to Brandon. He put his paws on Brandon's legs, asking to be picked up one last time. Brandon hugged him close, breathing in the now clean fur. Be good, he whispered. No more running away. Charlie licked his face, then limped back to Emma. They all got into their cars, the Thompsons in their SUV, Brandon and his mother in their Honda. Standing in their driveway, watching the expensive car drive away, Brandon felt his mother's arm around his shoulders. You did good, baby, she said softly. You did real good. Brandon leaned against her, thinking about Charlie safe at home, about Emma's promise of friendship, about his mother's new job. All because he'd followed his heart and helped a scared, hurt dog. Mom, he asked. Yes, baby? Do you think, maybe someday, we could get a dog too? She laughed, hugging him closer. Let's see how the new job goes first. But maybe, just maybe, they stood there a moment longer, watching the sun climb higher over their small house with its crooked steps and peeling paint. For the first time in a long time, it didn't look sad to Brandon. It looked like a place where good things could happen, where good things were already happening. The next morning, Brandon woke to the sound of hammering. He rushed to his window and saw 3 trucks parked outside, their sides marked with Thompson Construction. Brandon, his mother called. Come eat breakfast before school. He hurried to the kitchen, stopping short in the doorway. His mother was there, still in her pajamas, making pancakes. She hadn't made pancakes since he couldn't remember when. Mom, don't you have work? She flipped a pancake, smiling. Not until Monday. Mrs. Thompson insisted I take the rest of the week off before starting the new position. The hammering got louder. Outside, workers were already removing the old front steps. Mr. Thompson texted this morning. His mother continued. He's not just fixing the steps. He's having them repair everything Mr. Peterson's been complaining about. Brandon sat at the table, watching in amazement as she placed a stack of pancakes in front of him. Really? Really? The steps, the paint, even the gate. She sat down with her own plate. And that's not all. She pulled an envelope from her pocket and slid it across the table. Brandon opened it carefully. Inside was a check with more zeros than he'd ever seen. But we told them we didn't want the reward, he said. Mr. Thompson said it's not a reward. She took a bite of pancake. He said it's payment for professional dog-sitting services rendered. Brandon laughed. The sound echoed in their kitchen, which suddenly didn't feel so empty anymore. A knock at the door interrupted their breakfast. His mother answered it, speaking briefly with someone outside. She came back with a large package. "It's for you," she said, setting it on the table. Brandon opened it carefully. Inside was a new jacket, much nicer than the one he'd used to carry Charlie, and a note in Emma's careful handwriting. "Dear Brandon, since you gave your jacket to Charlie, we thought you needed a new one. See you Saturday." Emma and Charlie. Under the jacket was something else. A brand new art set with colored pencils, markers, and a real sketchbook. "Mom," Brandon whispered, touching the supplies reverently. "Look." She blinked back tears. "That Emma is a thoughtful girl." The workers outside called for her to check something about the repairs. While she was gone, Brandon's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Brandon. It's Emma. Mom put your number in my phone. Charlie misses you already. Look." A photo followed, Charlie sleeping with his head on what Brandon recognized as his old jacket. Brandon smiled, typing back. "Tell him I miss him too. How's his leg?" "Much better. Dad took him to the vet yesterday. The bandage comes off next week. Maybe you can be here when we take it off." Before Brandon could reply, another message came through. "Also, Mom wants to know if you like chocolate cake. She's baking one for Saturday." His fingers flew over the keys. "I love chocolate cake. Tell her thanks." "Cool." Charlie says woof. "Not really. He's still sleeping, lol." Brandon was still grinning at his phone when his mother came back inside. "Good news," she said. "The repairs will be done by tomorrow. And Mr. Thompson is sending a landscaping crew next week to fix the yard." Brandon looked up from his phone. "Really? Really?" She sat back down, her eyes bright. "You know what the best part is? With this new job, we'll be able to maintain everything properly. No more waiting for things to break down completely before fixing them." The hammering outside had turned to the buzz of sanders. Through the window, Brandon could see the workers prepping the house for painting. "What color are they painting it?" he asked. "Whatever color we want." She smiled. "Mr. Thompson said to pick any color we like." Brandon thought about it. "Could we do light blue? Like the sky." "Light blue it is." She checked her watch. "You better get ready for school." "Want me to drive you today?" He stared at her. "You never get to drive me to school." "Things are changing, baby." She stood up, collecting their plates. "Good things." As Brandon got ready for school, he heard his mother humming in the kitchen, another sound he hadn't heard in years. His new art supplies went carefully into his backpack, along with the jacket. Outside, the workers had already built the frame for the new steps. One of them waved at Brandon. "Nice solid stairs for you, kid," he said. "No more wobbling." In the car, Brandon's mother looked different. The dark circles under her eyes were fading, and she sat straighter behind the wheel. "I was thinking," she said as they drove, "maybe this weekend we could go shopping? Get you some new clothes for when you visit Charlie. Can we afford it?" She reached over to squeeze his hand. "Thanks to Mr. Thompson's dog-sitting payment, yes. We can afford quite a bit now." At school, before he got out of the car, she hugged him tight. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You know that, right? So proud of your kind heart." Brandon hugged her back. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, baby. Have a good day." He watched her drive away, noticing how she didn't look rushed or worried for the first time in forever. His phone buzzed again. Another picture from Emma, this time of Charlie playing with his favorite toy. "He keeps bringing this to the back door," Emma wrote. "I think he's looking for you." Brandon smiled, typing back. "Tell him just 3 more days till Saturday." Walking into school, he realized something felt different. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders, worry about his mom, about money, about being alone, felt lighter. In art class, he pulled out his new supplies. The teacher noticed immediately. "Those are professional grade materials," she said, impressed. "Someone must think you have real talent." Brandon thought about the drawings the Thompsons had seen in his room. Had they noticed something in them? At lunch, he sat with his usual empty table, but it didn't feel so lonely. His phone kept buzzing with messages from Emma, pictures of Charlie, questions about what games he liked to play, what movies he enjoyed. After school, instead of walking home alone, his mother was waiting in the parking lot. "I thought we could go look at paint colors," she said. "The workers need to know by tomorrow morning." They spent an hour at the hardware store, comparing shades of blue. His mother didn't rush him or worry about getting to work. She just helped him hold up color samples to the light, discussing which ones might look best. Back home, the new steps were almost finished. They were wide and sturdy, with a proper handrail that shone in the afternoon sun. "Beautiful work," his mother told the foreman. "Just beautiful." Inside, Brandon went to his room to start homework. But first, he took out his new sketchbook and began to draw. Not houses this time, or families he wished he had. Instead, he drew Charlie with his bandaged leg and wagging tail. He drew Emma's smiling face and Mr. Thompson kneeling to check the steps. He drew his mother making pancakes in her pajamas. He drew the things he had now, not the things he wished for. And somehow, that made all the difference. A week had passed, and Brandon could hardly recognize his own house. The fresh light blue paint glowed in the morning sun, making it look like a completely different place. New steps led up to a newly painted door, and the yard showed the first signs of grass coming in where the landscapers had worked. His mother came out onto their new front porch, travel mug in hand. She was wearing crisp navy scrubs with the logo of her new hospital. "Ready for your first Saturday at the Thompsons?" she asked. Brandon nodded eagerly, clutching his new backpack. Inside were his art supplies. Emma had asked him to teach her how to draw Charlie. The drive to Oak Grove Drive felt shorter now that they'd made it several times. His mother hummed along to the radio, looking rested after her first week of normal working hours. "Remember," she said as they pulled up to the Thompsons' house, "I'll pick you up at 5. After Charlie's bandage comes off," Brandon said. The vet was coming to the house specially to remove it. Mrs. Thompson opened the door before they reached it. "Brandon, we were just talking about you. Charlie's been sitting by the window all morning." Sure enough, the Yorkshire came running, without a limp now, straight to Brandon. His tail wagged so hard his whole body shook. "Hi, Charlie." Brandon knelt to greet him. The dog covered his face in kisses. "Come in, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson said to Brandon's mother. "Have a coffee before you go." Inside, Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. "Brandon, Mom made chocolate cake for after the bandage comes off. And Dad set up the game room for us." Mr. Thompson looked up from his newspaper. "Good morning, Brandon. Ready for a big day?" "Yes, sir." Brandon followed Emma upstairs, Charlie trotting between them. The game room was amazing. A huge TV, every game console imaginable, and a table perfect for drawing. But first, Emma insisted on showing Brandon all of Charlie's favorite spots. "He sleeps here," she said, showing him a fancy dog bed. "But look what else he likes to sleep on." Brandon's old jacket lay neatly folded on a cushion near Charlie's bed. "He won't let us wash it," Emma explained. "Mom thinks it's because it smells like you." They spent the morning playing with Charlie, drawing pictures, and sharing stories. Emma taught Brandon how to play her favorite video games, and he showed her how to sketch Charlie's face. Around noon, Mrs. Thompson brought them sandwiches and juice. "The vet will be here in an hour," she said. "How does Charlie's leg look, Brandon?" Brandon watched Charlie playing with a toy. "He's not limping anymore. Thanks to you," she smiled. "If you hadn't found him." She didn't finish, but Brandon understood. Charlie could have been hurt much worse, or never found at all. The vet arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. Everyone gathered in the living room as she examined Charlie's leg. "You did an excellent job with the initial care," she told Brandon. The wound healed beautifully. Carefully, she unwrapped the bandage. The spot where Charlie had been hurt was now just a small patch of healing skin, mostly hidden by his growing fur. "Good as new," the vet declared. Charlie celebrated by running circles around the room, stopping to jump into Brandon's lap. "Cake time," Emma announced. Mrs. Thompson's chocolate cake was the best Brandon had ever tasted. As they ate, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Brandon," he said, "we have something to discuss with you." Brandon sat up straighter. Charlie, sensing his nervousness, pressed against his leg. Emma tells us you're quite good at art, Mr. Thompson continued. And your mother mentioned you spent a lot of time alone after school. Brandon nodded, not sure where this was going. Well, Mrs. Thompson took over. We know a wonderful art teacher who gives private lessons. And since Emma has been wanting to learn too, we thought, Mr. Thompson finished, you might both like to take lessons twice a week. Here, after school. Charlie would certainly enjoy the company. Brandon's eyes widened. Really? Really, Mrs. Thompson smiled. Your mother already agreed. The car service that takes Emma to dance class can pick you up from school on lesson days. And, Emma added excitedly, we can do our homework together too. Mom said you can stay for dinner those nights. Brandon looked at Charlie, who wagged his tail as if saying this was all his idea. Thank you, he whispered, then louder. Thank you so much. The afternoon passed in a blur of games, drawing, and playing with Charlie. Before Brandon knew it, his mother was back to pick him up. She looked different when she came in, happy, relaxed. Her new job was only 3 days in, but already the change was visible. How was your day? She asked as they drove home. Amazing, Brandon said. Did you know about the art lessons? She nodded, smiling. Mrs. Thompson suggested it last week. I think it's a wonderful idea. They pulled up to their house, their beautiful, freshly painted house with its sturdy steps and growing grass. Oh, his mother said, look who's here. Mr. Peterson, their landlord, was standing in their yard, staring at the house with his mouth open. Evening, Mr. Peterson, Brandon's mother called cheerfully. Notice anything different? What? How? He stammered. We had some help from friends, she said simply. No more liability issues to worry about. Inside, Brandon went to his room to put away his art supplies. The walls were freshly painted here too, and new curtains hung at his window, all part of Mr. Thompson's repairs. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Charlie's already waiting by the window for Tuesday. Mom says, don't forget your art supplies for the first lesson. Brandon smiled, typing back, wouldn't forget. Tell Charlie I miss him already. A photo came through. Charlie sleeping with his old jacket again, fully healed and completely happy. That night, Brandon lay in bed thinking about everything that had changed in just 1 week. His mother worked normal hours now. Their house was beautiful. He had a best friend in Emma, art lessons to look forward to, and Charlie to play with. All because he'd stopped to help a scared, hurt dog. His mother poked her head in. Ready for bed? Mom, he asked as she sat on his bed. Do you think Charlie knew? Knew what, baby? That we needed him as much as he needed us? She smiled, smoothing his hair. Dogs are smart that way. They know who needs love. Through his window, Brandon could see stars, something he'd never noticed before from his room. The new curtains, when pulled back, gave him a perfect view of the night sky. I'm proud of you, his mother said softly. You taught me something important. What's that? That sometimes the bravest thing isn't doing something big and grand. Sometimes it's just stopping to help someone who's hurt, even when you're hurting too. She kissed his forehead and got up to leave. Mom? Brandon called as she reached the door. I love you. Love you too, baby. Sweet dreams. Brandon drifted off to sleep in his freshly painted room, in their freshly painted house, thinking about Charlie and Emma and art lessons and friendship. His last thought before sleep took him was that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. And somewhere across town, in a mansion on Oak Grove Drive, a small Yorkshire Terrier slept curled up with an old jacket, waiting for Tuesday and his friend to return.